Have you ever been in a situation where you were looking for help or some understanding or somebody to relate to you in a way that was meaningful, simply because they've been through the same ordeal as you have been? Have you ever been in that situation? My father used to say this short parable where there was a guy, he was cleaning the snow from his roof, and he slipped and fell from the roof, and he was lying flat on the street, and it was in agony. And his neighbors ran to the street, circled him, and they said, wait, don't move, we're gonna call a doctor. And the guy that fell said, no, don't call a doctor. Call somebody that fell off the roof. And as believers, we have that person in Jesus. And that's what we're going to start looking at in chapter 5 of Hebrews. For every high priest taken from among men is appointed on behalf of men in things pertaining to God, in order to offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. I just want to take a minute to talk about priesthood. Now, we're reading the New Testament, the Christian Bible, and writer of Hebrews is writing to a Jewish audience, as you know. And as you might be surprised to find out, priesthood is not a Christian office. I'm going to repeat that. Priesthood is not a Christian New Testament office. Priesthood is an Old Testament office. Priesthood existed in Judaism. It does not exist in Christianity. Why do I say that? When we look at who a priest is, and he kind of mentioned it superficially here, priest was a person that went before God on behalf of people. Priest was a person that went before God on behalf of people. People could not go to God. They needed someone to go for them. People in the Old Testament did not have the freedom to go before God. If you are familiar with your Old Testament, you know the tabernacle was set up in a way. You could go in, kind of like a building like this, and let's say the outside is where everybody came in. This part where you guys are sitting would be the area where the believers came in, and this part, let's call it Holy of Holies, will be covered. That's why you will see some of the churches cover it with a curtain. That is not a New Testament picture. That is an Old Testament picture that is being used in the New Testament era, which we do not agree with. Why? That curtain that covered separated the congregation from where God was. God was behind that curtain. As you know, behind that curtain was the Ark of the Covenant and the two cherubim, and when they first built the tabernacle, God rested there, symbolically. And only the high priest, once a year, was able to go in there, in front of God. And the only way he could go in was, just like we read, is he would first make sacrifices for himself because he was a sinner, and then make sacrifices for the sins of the people. And after those sacrifices, he could go before God and ask for forgiveness. Now, when Jesus died on the cross. Do you remember the scene? Do you remember reading that the curtain in the temple was ripped from top to bottom? Do you know how symbolic that is? Do you know how meaningful that is? That curtain that was separating man from God was ripped. So therefore, if you go to a church today that has a curtain separating God from man, that's not a New Testament teaching. That's an Old Testament teaching. That's before Jesus, not after Jesus. That's why there is no priesthood in the New Testament church. Why? Because we don't need somebody to go before God on behalf of us. Every believer can go before God on behalf of himself or herself. I want you to be clear about this. So in our churches, we do not have priests. Priest is an Old Testament concept. It's not a Christianity concept. Every believer is a priest in the sense that he or she can go before God for themselves. Because why? Because a believer has his or her sins already forgiven because of what Jesus did on the cross. Because of that, we can go before God. Just like we read last week, boldly before the throne of God. Why? Because I'm forgiven. I don't have anything blocking me from going to the Father. So that's the priest deal right there. He can deal gently, verse 2, with the ignorant and the misguided, since he himself also is beset with weaknesses. Saying basically, since he is human, he's fallen. He's talking about the high priest now. High priest office in the Old Testament. He knows the weaknesses of people because he himself is weak. Because of it, he is obligated to offer sacrifices for sins, as for the people, also for himself, just like we said. And no one takes this honor on himself, but receives it when he is called by God, even as Aaron was. Just like the priests were called by God to that office, today we don't have priests, we have people in the ministry, we have pastors, we have missionaries. If you're seeking one of these offices, make sure you are called by God. Just because I want to become a missionary, that doesn't mean God is calling me to be a missionary. Make sure you're called, because you will have wasted your years and you will be embarrassed before God. No one takes this honor on himself, but receives it when he is called by God, even as Aaron was. So also Christ did not glorify himself so as to become a high priest, but he who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." Just as he says in another passage, "You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek." Now, writer of Hebrews is making clear that even Jesus himself was called for his office. So he's underlining the importance of calling in one's life. Now he mentions this person Melchizedek. We're going to deal with him more in chapter 7, but let's just call him the King of Salem for the time being. And we'll deal more with him in the chapters to come. Now he's talking about Jesus on verse 7. In the days of his flesh, he offered up both prayers and supplications with loud crying and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his piety. What is the scene you think he's talking about here? What scene is this? Can you picture it? Now he's talking about Jesus, and he's saying in the days of his flesh, when he was on earth, he offered up prayers and supplications with loud cryings and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. What scene do you think this is? I would say this is the scene in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus was so stressed that the capillaries in his head just burst and he was bleeding sweat. Or sweating blood, however you want to put it. He was under, doctors say, under extreme amounts of stress. Those capillaries burst. And that's what he was going through. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. And having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation. Jesus himself suffered. And because of his sufferings, he can identify with us. When you're in agony, when you're in pain, when you don't know what to do, when you're struggling in your life, Jesus can identify with that. That's why we can go to him. If you're worried about your kids or grandkids, Jesus can identify with worry. He understands exactly where we are. But unlike us, he didn't give in to the fears. Unlike us, he didn't give in to the worries. He was victorious over all of them, all the temptations. So not only he knows our weakness, what we're going through, but he also knows how we can win, how we can be victorious. Being designated by God, verse 10, as a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. Now, verse 11 to the end of the chapter, verse 14, deals with another issue. Which is growing in faith, maturity in one's faith. Let's read it together. Concerning him, we have much to say, as it is hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. This is a rebuke on the part of the writer of Hebrews to his audience, because even though he wants to talk more about Jesus and Melchizedek and the parallels between them and what it means to them, he says, you're not able to understand it because you have become dull in your hearing. You're not hearing it right. You're not understanding it right. And he's going to go into that now. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you have need again for someone to teach you the elementary principles and the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk, not solid food. By this time, he's saying, you've heard this 1,000 times. You've been coming to church for many years. But you're still missing it. You still don't get it, he's saying. By this time, you should be teachers. Yet, you still don't know the basics. You're getting lost in the basics. I wonder if this applies to any one of us today, including me. Are we still struggling in the basics, I wonder? Or is there any growth in our faith? And I was challenged by this myself. I'm like, yeah, I'm teaching, but am I growing in my faith? Am I at the same place I was last year and 2 years ago? What did I learn in this last couple of years? How did I grow in my faith and in my understanding? Believe me, it's easy to talk to other people. But we all have to answer to the Lord. I do too. Did I grow in my faith, in my understanding? You see, a lot of times, and you see this in mature Christians as well, sometimes it's easy to mistake teaching others with spiritual maturity. It's easy to talk to other people, tell other people what to do. And there's a danger in that, in the sense that I would feel like if I'm telling others what to do, I'm okay, I got this. But no, just the opposite. I myself need to learn and to grow and to be better than I was last year and better than I was 2 years ago. So, for this reason, a lot of people, unfortunately, instead of looking in to see if they're growing, they kind of like go outside and start telling everybody what to do and start teaching people. That's a trap. I want you to be careful of that. We are responsible for ourselves before the Lord. Every knee will bow, right? Am I growing in my faith? Am I growing in my understanding of the scriptures? Am I clearer today on what God wants me to do in my life? Do I have victory over some struggles that I've had last year or 2 years ago? Or am I going backwards? You see, I need you, we all need to be aware of this. God's expectation for a believer is to grow. We cannot be where we were 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We can't say, okay, I'm a believer and I'm done. No. And he's going to give an example here. For everyone who partakes only in milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he is an infant. Baby is born. If that baby doesn't grow, would you say that there is something wrong in that situation? Is that healthy? Is that expected? No, the natural expectation is the baby is born and that baby gets milk, and after a while that baby gets solid food and the baby grows. And God's expectation is the same for us. He wants to see growth in our faith, in our understanding, in our knowledge. He wants to see more Christ likeness in our life. So when you, as you're sitting there, when you look back to the last year or 2 years ago, are you in a place where you are more mature in your faith? Do you have victories in areas where you used to struggle? Are you better off today in your faith? Is there any growth? These are the questions we are responsible for. Forget what everybody perceives. Forget what everybody is seeing from the outside. Focus on what God knows about you in your spiritual life, in your thought life, in your heart, in your feelings. Is there any growth in that area? That's what he wants from us. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil. Babies just want milk and they're happy. But solid food, if you're growing, you're going to have discernment. Why? Because of practice. We're going to practice what we learn. We're going to put into practice. You're going to hear something today, and you're going to put into practice in your life. And you're going to fail at some things. You're going to be victorious in some things. In your daily reading of scriptures, you will notice something, and you're going to put that to practice. You're going to fail at it. You're going to be victorious at it. You're going to struggle against it. You're going to get better and better at it. That's God's expectation. None of us are perfect. We did not start perfect. But every passing day, we have to get better and better and better. So this is the challenge for all of us. As we read, as we learn, as we understand, putting what we learned, what we read, into practice. That's where growth happens, because once we start putting in practice, we'll see in what areas we're failing. We'll see in what areas we're coming short in. And then once we realize where we're failing, we say, okay, well, this is not right. Let's fix it. What do I do to fix it? What do I change about my thoughts, my feelings, my plans, the way I live, the choices I make? What do I need to change? And then in all those areas, we start making the right and the godly decisions. And that in of itself is going to bring some challenges. So you're going to keep fighting. Christian life is one of fight. And fight happens right here in your mind. You're fighting against yourself, your bad habits, your wrong thoughts, your bad influences, the dysfunctions you have, and everything else. You're fighting yourself. You're fighting a world system who's against the believer. So you have to be living in the world within that system, so you have to have your guard up and fight against those things so that it doesn't influence you and your family. And then on top of this, you're fighting an enemy of your soul who just wants to get you miserable and fail at every single turn. He wants you to make the wrong decisions so that you will be miserable and you will say, forget this faith life. This is for old people and needy people. I don't need God. He's trying to get you there. Or he wants you to minimize God and use him as a good luck charm, like a rabbit foot or whatever else you believe in. Does anybody believe in rabbit foots anymore? I don't know. Yeah, a lot of people believe in that evil eye, right? They think it's going to protect them. No. God is not a symbol. He's not a good luck charm. He's God. He wants us to surrender to him completely and do what he wants us to do. So bring it all together. 2 points from this chapter. 1, Jesus knows exactly what you're going through, and that's why he can help you. Go to him, because he has the answers. 2, check yourself to see if you're growing in faith. If you're not more victorious in some areas, if there isn't any more clear revelation of God's scriptures in your mind, if you don't know the word better than you did 2 years ago, there is something wrong. Your growth is stunted. And that's always unhealthy. Take these 2 points with you. Jesus knows what you're going through, so that's why he can help you. 2, he wants us to grow so that we can have that more fulfilled life that we're trying to achieve on our own. But we can't. God bless you.